I'm not sure little black girls dream of becoming the superintendent of schools. Even when they grow up and become educators or principals, I do not believe that they desire to be the superintendent. Superintendents are predominantly male. In fact, over 75% of all superintendents are white males. With such an overwhelming majority, why would a little black girl or woman think that that dream was available to her? So how did I become a superintendent? My path started with my son. At the age of 2, he was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. For 3 long years, we endured chemotherapy, hospital stays, tests, and tears. We had no control over the situation. But it was through that I learned a tremendous amount about myself, that I was strong in faith, I had courage, I grew in confidence, I learned how to sacrifice, and I became an advocate for my son because he could not speak for himself. And so I thought, if I could make it through that trauma and come out on the other side, thriving, both my son and I, then in my career, I knew I could do anything. When I was a principal, the deputy superintendent asked me, "Where do you see yourself in 10 years?" Mind you, I was 35 at the time, and with all the confidence in myself, I said, "Your job." He smiled and said, "That's good." Now that I'm thinking about it, that smile probably meant you have no idea what you're asking for. But 4 years later, I achieved my goal. I became the first female deputy superintendent. Being an African-American woman in leadership is not as simple as pulling up your bootstraps and working hard. It was those lessons that I learned through my son that became paramount for me to maneuver discrimination, sexism, bias, and the political structures that surrounded public education. I soon found out when I became superintendent of schools that those lessons would become invaluable because I needed more faith, more courage, more confidence, and more knowledge, and I had to sacrifice more. And yes, I became a fearless advocate for those who could not speak for themselves. You see, being the first superintendent that is of African American descent is not uncommon for Black women. Many of them are the first. In my 2 districts that I led, I was the first. And it reminded me of my grandmother, who was one of the first Black principals in her school district. And she said to me, "Being the first is like being a scout in the war. The bullets may hit you first, but you make it safer and easier for those who come behind you." As I stated, I was superintendent of 2 districts. I took the bullets for my students and my staff because they were worth it. But I also took the bullets because I remained committed to allowing others to achieve this same dream. I was committed to ensuring that it would be easier for those who came behind me. Even when the challenges and the degradation came from the local to the highest levels of government in this state, I told myself, it is still worth it, because someone has to come behind me and take up the mantle of leadership, because representation matters. When I visited schools, I would often ask students, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" For the young men, it seemed very easy. They were either going to be a professional athlete or have some high-paying job of leadership. But for the young women, they seemed unsure. They chose careers that probably people would say were typical for women. They played it safe. I was kind of stunned that in this day and time, these young women did not dream bigger for themselves, whether it was leadership in education or another industry. But unfortunately, this is in line with the view that society has of women today in leadership. Today, there are 13,728 public school superintendents. Of that number, 14% are women. And of the 14%, 1.4% are African American. That equates to about 198. That is a shocking statistic. And sadly, 5 years ago, that number was at least at 3%. So as you see, we're going in the wrong direction. Some of the reasons for the dwindling numbers are retirements, firings, or individuals just choosing to walk away from the job. When I retired, I was proud of our accomplishments, such as having the highest graduation rates during my tenure and removing all the schools off the state turnaround list. But you see, this is much bigger than me. I want to think about, now that I've left, and that other African American women superintendents are leaving, who's left to take up the mantle of leadership? Representation matters. It is not the lack of talent or ability that block Black women from being superintendents. I remember reading an article from Ed Week, and it stated, "The lack of representation is at the intersection of sexism and racism. Women of color live in that space. Black women live in that space. I live in that space, where the road to advancement and leadership can be blocked by systematic racism and sexism, which is alive and well in our society, and especially education. In addition, it may be what women see. Someone once asked me, you know, every time I see you, you seem to be always dressed to perfection. And I said, absolutely. Anytime I'm in public, my hair and my persona will be perfect, because I never know when I'm running into a parent or a community member or a student. I remember a parent asking me to take a picture with her daughter, which I get asked a lot of times. And she said, I need this picture so that my daughter can be reminded that she can do anything. But you know, when I think about that question, the real question that comes to my mind is, whose definition of perfection was I trying to meet? I was superintendent for Duval County for 5 years. And for every goal and accomplishment my team achieved, for every hard-fought win, there was backlash. When we got a referendum on the ballot, immediately there was a move to make the appointed superintendent position into an elected superintendent position. When we won the battle of changing the names of 6 schools that were named after Confederate soldiers, I received threatening letters. I had a stalker. And I was called every inappropriate name that one could think of. During a global pandemic, we implemented a comprehensive approach to COVID, including wearing masks for the safety and health of all employees and all children. And again, I received threatening letters. I had to appear before the State Board of Education, and hate mail. This was worth it. Everything that I have done throughout my career has been about serving the children and employees, those who do not have a voice. But I do want to say all is not lost. Studies show that when Black students have at least a Black teacher for 1 year, they are less likely to drop out of school and more likely to take advanced courses in high school and go on to college. Representation matters, even for adults. There is a sisterhood where African American female superintendents coalesce together, and through the power of sisterhood, they have made tremendous impact and change in their schools and communities. While I'm no longer a superintendent, I'm still a member of this team, of this sisterhood, because we support one another, we encourage one another, and we provide guidance when there are challenging issues or challenging times ahead of them. Representation matters. In the aftermath of COVID, students of color were the most impacted by their education being interrupted. They have the most ground to make up, to be exposed to the same success and advancement as their white peers. It is through leadership that we will be able to catch these students up. And Black women are ready for that challenge, and they do not ask for anything except an opportunity. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, recently, Black women make up 68% of associate's degrees, 66% of bachelor's degrees, 71% of master's degrees, and 65% of postgraduate degrees. I remember a consultant telling me over 20 years ago, Diana, get your doctorate and you can become a superintendent. Today, only 44% of all superintendents have a postgraduate degree. So not only do we have the degrees, we come from all walks of life, that we bring experiences that will ensure that all students, no matter their background, can be successful. It is this perception that only one can make decisions about the future of our children. We should want many being able to make decisions that impact our children. It is the diversity of thought and action that makes the difference. That's exactly the work I'm engaged in now as the new CEO of Children's Literacy Initiative. It is my mission to make sure that children can be educated in safe and joyous spaces, being able to have access to books where they can see mirrors of themselves, and in addition, see windows opening up for the vast possibilities. I also are training teachers in research-based literacy instruction and anti-racist pedagogy. But most importantly, I hope that I can encourage those same teachers to take up the mantle of leadership. If not for my son and the situation he went through, my family, my mentors, my sister superintendents, and my community, my journey would not have been as vast, as bountiful as it has been, because they helped me realize a dream that I didn't even know I wanted, nor could I achieve. But as a society, we have to start recognizing that there are plenty of seats at the table of leadership. And we need to encourage young women of color, young Black women, to take on that leadership role. Black women are resilient. We are resourceful. We are strong. And more than ever, our schools need that strength, because representation matters. Thank you very much.